this episode of Get Real with Morton, where we're having conversations with our customers about gritty topics to do with real estate. And I'm joined here today by Lucy White.
Hi.
Who is our sales manager here. But Lucy, maybe before we sort of get into it, just tell everybody what your real estate background is.
Oh, well, I have been selling real estate on the Lower North Shore for over 22 years.
22 years.
Yeah.
Doesn't look it.
I started with my dad's business, actually.
Yeah.
And
Second generation real estate agent.
Yep, and have been selling here ever since. So I've been doing a lot of selling, both private treaty and auction.
She's now a leader. Yeah. And how are you going with that?
I'm always learning.
Always learning.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, isn't it? But what we're here today to talk about is we're going to talk about investment properties. Quite a contentious sort of a subject in the Sydney property field, because one of the things that we have noticed over the last couple of years is investors have actually been buying elsewhere, not in Sydney. And I want to talk about that today and potentially why people should be actually focusing back on Sydney. So we'll get into that. One of the first things we want to talk about is infrastructure and development. So what would be your comment on that one, Lucy?
I think when considering buying investment property, definitely consider the infrastructure and development around an area.
And there's some of that. There's quite a bit of that going on in Sydney at the moment, like with the metros.
Metro, but there was also in the northern suburbs hospital that when that was built, those property values went up significantly.
Yep.
So that's a factor because they're for jobs that it creates, so they typically have to get accommodation around there, and then there's jobs and activity and the infrastructure, and then long-term growth.
Yeah, and you do see that. Like there's been lots of examples, for example, like Riverwood, where we've got a presence, when they built the M5. So you had the M5 on one side and you had the railway on the other side. Suburbs which hadn't had a lot of attention really started to get it because suddenly accessibility became a lot better.
Oh, Parramatta's another example.
Good one, yeah.
And also Penrith.
Yeah. Penrith's one of my favourites at the moment because obviously with the airport going in there is such a lot of activity.
I was going to say that as well. Yeah. So in terms of like two things you think about when you buy an investment property are growth in terms of the value of the property, but also rental return.
Yeah.
And I think in Penrith, while the growth may not have been as high as some other areas, that rental return was just consistent.
It was a killer. And do you think that there's now, like looking at it, like from your perspective as a long-term real estate professional, what sort of areas do you think you would look at from an infrastructure perspective?
Western suburbs.
Western suburbs, definitely.
There's a lot of money being spent out there.
West is best, we say.
Yeah. And also, I mean, that also, you've got to think about things like affordability as well when you buy an investment property. So that ticks that box. Yep. Whereas somewhere like the North Shore, people would buy there as an investment for different reasons in terms of capital growth over a period of time. It's a safer bet, but rental return isn't as good as some other areas.
Well, and also
we've got the office in Green Square, and I know Calvin has talked like that the rental return there is very good at the moment.
Yep.
But that is so that you've got to weigh all of those things up when you're looking at what your goal is for the investment.
Because I suppose for an investor, what do they want? They want good rental return and they want good capital growth. They want both those things. Are both those things, in your view, guaranteed with an investment property?
No. Based on what I've seen, you choosing one or the other.
And it's interesting. So people who are sort of more on the affordable level or wanting to make sure they can pay their bills tend to opt more for the rental return.
Correct.
Whereas those who are willing to take a
long-term hold,
going for the capital gain.
Yeah.
And what if you were buying an investment property, which one would you prioritise? That's a tricky question, that one.
It is a tricky question, but I'd probably go for the capital growth.
Yeah.
In terms of, I'd buy that rather than a rental return.
And I suppose bringing that back to infrastructure and development, that's one of the reasons to be near those centres, because capital values do increase a lot and rental returns can increase a lot because of the convenience of the spot. So, I think that's probably a good thing for everyone to look at is those hot spots where things are happening around metro stations, around infrastructure like the airport, particularly in Sydney. Don't discount those things. I think sometimes people tend to get caught up on inner city, but I think there's a lot of good opportunities to be had from a property investment point of view, definitely out west.
But we've definitely seen from what we saw investors drop out of the market.
Yeah.
And they're coming back.
Well, I suppose also too, you get another style of investor is the person who's buying the unit for the future, buying the property for the future. So they might be buying it now to rent it for 15 years or 20 years before they actually decide to move into it. We probably see a fair bit of that.
Probably in some suburbs more than others.
Yeah,
that one.
100%.
North Shore, definitely.
Yeah, and also the inner east, I'd say we'd see that.
Eastern suburbs,
Wharf.
and city.
Yeah, city. Certainly the posh apartments,
More
as I
expensive,
call them.
yeah.
That's the expensive apartments. People do buy those investments, but it's very much about the capital gain, but it's about having something that they can live in later, and they balance the payments, etc. on that. Yeah, definitely.
And then return on investment, that's something you need to consider in terms of making sure that you're going to get the highest rent that you can get.
Yep.
So there's some factors involved in that people should consider.
That's right. So there is quite a bit of scope to increase your rent. So what would be your sort of advice on that?
Definitely choosing the right property manager.
Yeah.
So that you get the property managed well.
Yep.
And it's looked after. If upgrades are needed over time, that they're done.
That's an interesting point, actually. Upgrades over time.
Yeah.
That's something I think we would probably recommend
Definitely.
to landlords is have an upgrade plan over the length of time you're going to hold the property. So it's 20 years or 15 years. Actually think about what you might spend along the way to upgrade it.
Yeah, but again, that's also, if you've got a good property manager there advising you on that, then, it's important. Getting the right tenant so that your property's looked after. There's a whole, raft of things that it requires to choose the right tenant, which isn't necessarily done by every agent. And the other thing that I would say in terms of when you're thinking about what property to buy for an investment is when we heard the rental commissioner talk, and they're looking at the rental crisis, that tenants are they're staying for longer, and there's more families that are renting.
Yeah.
So when looking at buying an investment property, it's worth considering the offering that you are buying so that it caters for the demand.
Well, we're definitely
potentially a bigger unit or a house. Where
true.
a family can stay there and stay longer.
True. I just had a conversation with someone today. Where you might have traditionally bought the one bedroom or the studio investment property, and the returns tend to be higher on those, the rental returns. But also the market is changing where a lot of people are either owning elsewhere and renting closer in, and they're doing that for lifestyle reasons, and definitely tenants looking more long term, particularly if they have a family and they're making decisions about things like schools. They don't want to be moving around.
Well, and that's why infrastructure when you're looking at buying is important, because people will look at, public transport to get to schools or to get to work, as well as send their kids to school. So if that's all nearby, then when you're looking at the property, that's super important.
No, 100%. And obviously one of the things that gets overlooked, I think, a lot is the finance side of it. So, we obviously focus a lot on rent. We focus on trying to get good deals for people
and the property.
Yeah, the whole bit. But people do tend to gloss the mortgage, like they're in a hurry to get it done, whereas there are a bunch of things that they can do to make sure they get a good deal. Do you want to touch on that?
In terms, things that you have to think about are affordability.
Yeah.
So if you can manage that mortgage, but also I think how it's set up tax-wise, I think that you need to get advice on that.
Yeah, and also
so
good
that
mortgage.
You're not paying too much tax
100%.
over time.
Yeah, the interest rates have also increased dramatically, but increased more dramatically than the rents have increased, and that has put people under pressure.
Yep.
Particularly with cost of living stuff. So you want to make sure you don't get yourself into hot water.
Yeah, you obviously want to get advice on that before you do the purchase.
Yeah, 100%. There is something that they say where the profit is in the buying. So for people out there wanting to buy property, which is a bit of a funny thing for us to say, is because we're out there trying to sell them for as much as we can. That's our job. But definitely from an investor's point of view, you do want to try and buy as well as you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Which is, why.
And what are your tips to that?
Tips would be, once you've got your pre-approval or your finance sorted, stick to the budget.
Yeah.
And what you might find is that you start out looking in a particular area, but then you quickly work out you're not going to necessarily get what you want in that area. So work out what you're happy to compromise on.
Yeah.
And that's where it's important for an investment property, working out whether you're going to be looking at capital growth or suitable.
One of the big things
investment.
I always say is know your market. So if you're going to buy a 2-bedroom apartment in Newtown, well, know Newtown like the back of your hand. It's interesting, a lot of investment properties that are sold through financial planners, I don't know, financial aid, where they're buying purely on rental return. It is a bit of a warning sign. It's not necessarily the best property. That's what
No.
I find.
Well, and things like parking, you might work out quickly that if you don't have parking, you can buy it cheaper, except that having parking when you're offering it for rent will be getting you a better caliber of a tenant, and more people will want that. So that's better off. You're better off investing the extra $50,000 for the car space. A lot of people say when they're looking at buying for an investment, they're thinking, could I live here?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily always the best thing to do, but it's worth considering.
And I would say my sort of warning. I was thinking if you're buying it purely for tax reasons, and that's what's being spat at you in terms of the depreciation schedules and all of that, making the numbers work, it's important, but make sure you're focused on the quality of the property.
Yeah.
Because we see that a lot where people turn up where they've made those type of decisions. You're like, oh no, and they're losing money, or it's turned out not to be a good one. They haven't thought about the aspect or that type of stuff. So definitely have a look at that. Well, that was pretty good, Lucy. I thought that was fantastic.
Thanks, Ewan.
So hopefully there's something in that for everybody about how to buy an investment property and how to manage that. That's what we do here at Morton Real Estate. So, from everybody, from all us, thank you very much, and get real with Morton.